solution. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Madam President, I would like to express our appreciation to the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this debate, which is particularly important given the increasingly fragile regional context. Madam President, as our discussions yesterday made clear, the consequences of the Iranian crisis extend far beyond the region. Poland firmly believes diplomacy is the only viable path forward. Lasting peace requires consensus on three core issues: Iran's nuclear program, its long-range ballistic missiles capabilities, and its regional conduct, while respecting international law, including the freedom of navigation. Progress on all three is essential. It is the foundation for any stable and lasting security framework in the region. Madam President, on the Palestinian question, Poland remains a firm supporter of the two-state solution, yet recent months have moved us further from that goal. Poland views Israel as an important partner in the region. While we recognize Israel's right to self-defense and complex political and security situation, we cannot ignore the abuses of the repeated violations of international humanitarian law. Poland shares the international community's alarm over escalating tensions in the West Bank. The violence by illegal settlers against the Palestinian population and actions by Israeli authorities that run counter to the Oslo Accords are deeply troubling. We are also concerned about the new death penalty law, which in practice primarily targets people in the occupied Palestinian territories. We are equally troubled by the refusal of Hamas and other Palestinian factions to engage in the disarmament proposals and put forward by the Board of Peace. As an observer to this initiative, Poland remains committed to its success and calls on all parties to engage in good faith. Finally, we urge the Board of Peace to press Israel and to grant humanitarian organizations full access to Gaza and to ease restrictions on aid in the West Bank. Madam President, allow me now to turn to the situation in Lebanon. Poland welcomes the ceasefire and hopes that both sides will seize this opportunity to build toward a lasting peace, one that both nations have long deserved. We remain a firm supporter of the UNIFIL mandate. Despite the difficult security conditions, our troops continue to serve in Lebanon, ready to carry out training activities and fulfill their mission. We strongly condemn the recent attacks on peacekeepers and call on all parties to cease such actions immediately. Poland's commitment to Lebanon goes further. Since 2023, our humanitarian contributions through UN agencies have surpassed $4.5 million, with particular emphasis on supporting local administration in responding to natural disasters and expanding access to renewable energy, areas critical to Lebanon's economic recovery. Madam President, looking ahead, Poland's development cooperation plan for 2026 designates Palestine, Lebanon and Syria as a priority recipients of our humanitarian assistance. Our commitment to the people of this region remains steadfast, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Switzerland is deeply concerned about the recent escalation in the Middle East and its grave consequences for civilian populations. It strongly condemns attacks targeting civilians, essential services, and civilian infrastructure prohibited under international humanitarian law. The protection of civilians requires a political solution. The two-state solution negotiated in accordance with international law remains the only way to achieve this. We call for the implementation of Resolution 2803 and all relevant Security Council resolutions. Switzerland condemns the ongoing violence in the Gaza Strip and is alarmed by the number of civilian casualties, including humanitarian workers, since the ceasefire. We call on all parties to fully respect this agreement, as well as their obligations under international humanitarian law. Persistent restrictions are severely hampering the humanitarian response. Switzerland reiterates the obligation to ensure safe, rapid and unimpeded access to all people in need, and calls on Israel to lift these restrictions. In the West Bank as well, the increase in violence against the civilian population is alarming. We are deeply concerned about violence by settlers, which is becoming increasingly extreme, including in the form of sexual violence, as well as about demolitions and forced evictions, often with the support of security forces. Switzerland rejects any attempt at annexation and any measure aimed at permanent territorial or demographic changes in the occupied Palestinian territory. It welcomes the holding of Palestinian elections, which are essential for strengthening the Palestinian Authority and achieving the two-state solution. Madam President, regarding the confrontation involving the United States, Israel and Iran, Switzerland is following with concern recent developments affecting the civilian population in the countries concerned and beyond. It calls for respect for the United Nations Charter, including the prohibition on the use of force. It calls on all parties to exercise the utmost restraint and to pursue diplomatic channels. The repercussions of this escalation are also being felt in several Gulf states. Switzerland calls for respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. In the Strait of Hormuz, Switzerland reiterates that freedom of navigation must be respected. We call on all parties to ensure the safety of navigation. Furthermore, Switzerland condemns the attacks against civilian populations and infrastructure in Lebanon and Israel. It welcomes the extension of the ceasefire and calls for its full respect. A permanent ceasefire must prevail. Switzerland remains at the disposal of the parties to support negotiations and the implementation of Resolution 1701. It condemns the attacks that claimed the lives of peacekeepers and expresses its solidarity with troop-contributing states. UN and humanitarian personnel must be protected as imposed by international humanitarian law and reaffirmed by Resolution 2730. The return to the diplomatic track and respect for international law, including the protection of civilians and reviving a credible political horizon, are inseparable. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries Montenegro, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Andorra and San Marino, align themselves with the statement. The full statement will be uploaded online. The European Union welcomes the ceasefire agreed by the United States and Iran. We urge all involved to fully respect the ceasefire across the region, cease all military operations, and fully ensure freedom of navigation as well as free and safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz in line with international law as reflected in UNCLOS. And in this context, we support the International Maritime Organization's plan for the release of vessels and seafarers trapped in the Persian Gulf and for the permanent reopening of the Strait. We commend Pakistan and other regional partners for their efforts and mediation that contributed to this positive outcome. Parties should continue engaging in good faith in efforts to reach a sustainable agreement on all areas of concern. The European Union will contribute to all diplomatic efforts in this endeavor, taking into consideration its full range of interests, capabilities and concerns, in coordination with partners. To this end, the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, and the High Representative of the European Union, Kaja Kallas, recently visited Gulf countries to show our solidarity and coordinate our efforts. The European Union also welcomes the ceasefire agreed by Israel and Lebanon on 16 April under the auspices of the United States. We urge all involved to fully respect the ceasefire and a cessation of all military operations to allow for negotiations of lasting peace under just and conducive conditions. We call for the full respect of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity and reiterate the need for full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. The European Union reaffirms its unwavering support for UNIFIL and condemns the unacceptable attacks against peacekeepers which constitute a grave violation of international law and must stop immediately. We call for a thorough investigation of these attacks. We pay tribute to the peacekeepers from Indonesia and France who died recently while serving in the name of peace and international security in Lebanon. We also express our steadfast support for the Lebanese people and authorities in the face of dire humanitarian needs, especially for displaced persons, and stand ready to continue to provide emergency assistance. We welcome the decision by the Lebanese authorities to ban Hezbollah's military activities and support the efforts to strengthen the Lebanese armed forces in view of gaining control of the whole Lebanese territory and to establish the state's monopoly on holding weapons. We will continue to stand firmly with Lebanon and to support all efforts towards de-escalation and lasting stability, including by contributing to the strengthening of the Lebanese armed forces. Colleagues, the deteriorating situation in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is of grave concern. The European Union reiterates its call for the full implementation of by all parties of the ceasefire and all other provisions of UNSC Resolution 2803 in line with relevant UN Security Council resolutions and international political and legal principles. In this context, we call for the permanent disarmament of Hamas and other non-state armed groups and support the mediators and the Office of the High Representative for Gaza to this end. We also call for the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip and the deployment of the temporary International Stabilization Force. The European Union deplores the continuing catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and calls on Israel to allow immediately unimpeded access and sustained distribution of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza, including via the Cyprus Maritime Corridor, and to enable the UN and its agencies, including UNRWA and humanitarian organizations, to work independently and impartially to save lives and reduce suffering. The EU calls on Israel to reverse its decision regarding the NGA registration law, to reopen Gaza border crossings, and to fully comply with its obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. The European Union stands ready to continue contributing to the implementation of the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict in accordance with Resolution 2803. The European Union will engage with international and regional stakeholders to contribute to the reconstruction and redevelopment of Gaza in line with international law. As civilian CSTP missions, EUPOL COPS and EUBAM Rafah remain key for the EU in contributing to these efforts. The European Union will also continue to support the Palestinian Authority, including in its reform agenda, so that it can securely and effectively take back control of Gaza. The EU calls on Israel to urgently release withheld clearance revenues and extend the correspondent banking services between Israeli and Palestinian banks. The European Union strongly condemns Israel's unilateral actions aiming to expand its presence in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion declared to be unlawful, and urges the government of Israel to reverse these decisions, to abide by its obligations under international law, and to protect the Palestinian population of the occupied territories. We also reiterate our call for the preservation of and respect for the status quo of Jerusalem's holy sites. The EU strongly condemns the continued and growing settler violence against Palestinian civilians and will take work forward on further restrictive measures against extremist settlers and entities and organizations that support them. Israel had long upheld a de facto moratorium on both executions and capital punishment sentencing, thereby leading by example in the region despite a complex security environment. The approval of the death penalty bill by the Israeli parliament marks a grave regression from that practice and from Israel's own commitments. The EU is deeply concerned about the de facto discriminatory character of the bill and urges Israel to abide by its previous principled position and with its obligations under international law, as well as its commitments to democratic principles. The EU is fully committed to international law and a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution in accordance with relevant UN Security Council resolutions where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. The New York Declaration provides a political framework to guide these efforts. On April 20th, we co-hosted two important meetings in Brussels, the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution and the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee. Both events demonstrated strong international consensus on safeguarding the two-state solution and strengthening Palestinian institutions as indispensable steps towards sustainable peace. President, let me close with Syria. The European Union remains committed to supporting a peaceful and inclusive transition that upholds the rights of Syrians from all ethnic and religious backgrounds without discrimination. We will maintain engagement with Syria's transitional government to advance inclusive political and democratic transition based on national reconciliation, promotion of human rights, and socio-economic recovery and reconstruction. We support the rebuilding of state institutions and the role of Syrian civil society and women as indispensable to these efforts. We also strongly support the strengthening of cooperation between the Syrian transition government and all UN bodies. For the transition to succeed, it is vital that Syria remains insulated from regional hostilities and is not drawn into the wider regional conflict. The EU urges all external actors to fully respect Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. We also recognize that Syria is particularly vulnerable to the current war's economic impact and underscore the importance of reconnecting Syria to regional and global trade networks. Finally, we reiterate that combating the resurgence of Daesh and other terrorist groups remains a priority and welcome the transitional government's renewed commitment to countering Daesh, including through the global coalition. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Lebanon.
Sayyid al-Rais.
Madam President, we meet today 12 days after the cessation of hostilities between Lebanon and Israel, thanks to the appreciated mediation of the United States of America. We highly value this effort of President Donald Trump and his team, especially in response to the initiative of the President of the Lebanese Republic and the sovereign positions of the Lebanese government. Today, we reaffirm our determination to move forward in our efforts to reach comprehensive and sustainable solutions. These would preserve Lebanon's and the Lebanese people's rights. It will ensure that they can live safely on their land following Israel's withdrawal from our territory. Will also ensure the return of prisoners and abductees. We reiterate that the Lebanese government will not compromise on a single meter of the Lebanese territories, and we will not accept any form of occupation. We stress that Lebanon, regardless of the cost, will not be subordinate to axes of influence, nor a tool for settling scores on its territories, will not be a bargaining chip used in negotiations. The Lebanese state alone is authorized to negotiate on its behalf in defense of its national and sovereign interests and the fate and future of its people. Madam President, while the diplomatic track is progressing and Lebanon is seriously engaged in that path, developments on the ground remain extremely dangerous. Israel continues to violate Lebanon's sovereignty. They are targeting civilians, medical personnel, hospitals, journalists, Lebanese security services, and UNIFIL forces. This comes in addition to the systematic destruction of villages, towns, infrastructure, and places of worship. Even a statue of Jesus Christ was not spared from attempts at its desecration. Lebanon condemns in the strongest terms these Israeli attacks, which clearly and unequivocally violate the Charter, international laws, and international humanitarian law. They amount to war crimes in certain instances. We follow with grave concern the practices of the Israeli army in southern Lebanon. These include those reported by Israeli media regarding systematic theft operations. According to the same sources, it appears to occur without any accountability or punishment. How can such practices contribute to building the necessary trust required for any future negotiation process? And what's the purpose of statements issued by Israeli ministers calling for the occupation of broader areas of Lebanese territory or threatening to burn Lebanon and all its cedar trees? In the same context, the statement delivered by the representative of Israel this morning, in its part relating to Lebanon, a number of falsehoods. One of those is undermining the credibility of the Lebanese government. This is a practice Israel has long pursued through its continuous violations of the 2024 cessation of hostilities declarations, and we have repeatedly warned against the consequences of such a path before your esteemed Council. What's more dangerous in our view is Israel's undermining of the credibility of the guarantor states of the 2024 cessation of hostilities declaration. These are France and the United States, and currently undermining the efforts undertaken by the United States aimed at de-escalation and advancing sustainable peaceful solutions. Mr. President, Lebanon today counts on the support of the brotherly and friendly countries. We emphasize the importance of reactivating the conference in support of the Lebanese armed forces convened at the invitation of France with the support of the Quintet. We also express our appreciation to all countries contributing to the UNIFIL. We pay tribute to the memory of peacekeepers who lost their lives in Lebanon. We renew our condolences to both Indonesia and France. In this context, we affirm our serious engagement with all relevant parties to chart the post-UNIFIL mandate phase in a manner that ensures stability along the border and the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. Mr. President, we underscore the importance of safeguarding the freedom of navigation for commercial and civilian vessels as enshrined in international law, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In this regard, we welcome the announcement of a ceasefire between the U.S. and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We commend the mediation efforts, particularly those undertaken by Pakistan. We hope these efforts would lead to a comprehensive and lasting agreement. We reiterate Lebanon's condemnation of the Iranian attacks targeting the Gulf Arab countries, Iraq and Jordan, and of violations of these brotherly states' sovereignty and the unacceptable threat posed to their security and stability. We welcome the positive trajectory of relations with the sister Syrian Arab Republic. We commend the level of coordination and consultation between the two countries, particularly the need to ensure border control and preventing any security breakdown, while emphasizing respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of both states and respecting the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. In light of Syria's recovery and stabilization, we see a genuine opportunity to advance the path towards the safe and dignified return of Syrian displaced persons in a gradual and organized manner. Turning to the sister state of Palestine, we affirm that achieving peace and security in the region remains contingent upon ending the Israeli occupation and its practices. We must enable the Palestinian people to attain their legitimate rights. Foremost among them is the establishment of their state along the lines of the 4th of June of 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, today we go through a pivotal stage in Lebanon's history, in which a long chapter is being closed, one in which national decisions were tied to external calculations. Lebanon will no longer accept the wars of others on its territory, nor their projects, nor the continuation of attacks against it from any party. The future belongs solely to the state and to a just peace that protects all Lebanese. Mr. President, the solutions are available and attainable. Let this Council shoulder its responsibility. Let Israel respect the ceasefire and honor its commitments to the American mediator and implement this Council's Resolution 1701. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Lebanon for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. Belgium aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. In our national capacity, we'd like to underscore the following. Yesterday, with Benelux, we addressed the issue of the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and maritime security. I'll touch on that subject later on. I'd like to begin by recalling Belgium's support for countries of the Gulf and the region in face of Iranian aggression. We call for a cessation of hostilities, and we thank Pakistan and the other facilitators for their contributions to organizing the negotiations. President, in Gaza, there are two key issues that require more specific and firm support from us. Firstly, the Gaza Strip must be demilitarized. Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, must hand over its arms and stop playing a role in the governance of Gaza. Belgium supports the efforts of the agreement's guarantors and of Nikolai Mladenov in this regard, in accordance with Resolution 2803 of this Council. These topics were discussed during the Global Alliance meeting for the implementation of the two-state solution that was organized last week in Brussels. Secondly, in respect for resolution adopted by this Council and international law, we should work to lay the foundations that could lead to a reformed Palestinian Authority retaking control over Gaza with full security and in good conditions. The Palestinian Authority should also be able to benefit both from the transfer of tax receipts that it has the right to, and also to access to macroeconomic monetary policy. We cannot address Gaza without referring to the catastrophic living conditions for its inhabitants. The human toll continues to add up, and humanitarian aid remains largely insufficient. Humanitarian access in Gaza can in no case be impeded. The Israeli power, as an occupying power, is obliged to accept relief and to facilitate the delivery of aid in the Gaza Strip. Belgium stands ready to participate in the recovery and reconstruction efforts in Gaza. The actors concerned must also ensure that they must also be able to have access. Belgium actively supports UNRWA, which, despite the recommendations in the Collinar report, currently remains a humanitarian actor and an essential service provider in Palestine, but also in Lebanon, Jordan, and in Syria. So as to consolidate UNRWA's credibility and to cut off its detractors, the implementation of the Collinar recommendations remains necessary. We firmly denounce the tightening of Israeli settlement activities and the increasing recourse to violence by Israeli settlers and Israeli forces. We cannot stand by with the de facto annexation which we are continuing to see before our eyes. We must react collectively in the face of these illegal acts and other violations of this Council's resolutions. It's further necessary to preserve the opportunity for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Without that, the prospect of a peaceful, lasting two-state coexistence might disappear. In Lebanon, attacks on UNIFIL are unacceptable. I join the condolences expressed to France and Indonesia so as to honor the memory of those who lost their lives, to respect the Charter and its principles. The security of blue helmets must be guaranteed in all circumstances. The Vice Prime Minister Prévost was able to see with his own eyes the bombings of Beirut on in his visit to the city. We welcome the temporary ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon facilitated by the United States. We hope that this will lay the foundations for a lasting peace in full respect for international law. To that end, we urge Israel to fully respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon, and Hezbollah to bring a definitive end to its military activities and to respect international humanitarian law in all circumstances. As Hezbollah must hand over its weapons and bring an end to its military activities in line with the decisions of the Lebanese government and the resolutions of this Council. Various efforts by the Lebanese government and the Lebanese armed forces must be supported, particularly through adapted UN and efficient UN presence in Lebanon. In conclusion, allow me to pay tribute to the memory of all of the innocent victims of the conflicts in the region. The first victims are once again the civilian populations. I would also like to recall the unwavering commitment of Belgium to respect for international law and the implementation of this Council's resolutions by all states. The inability to do this in a convincing manner will irremediably lay the foundations for future crises. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Belgium for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the 3 months since our last open debate, the global spotlight on the Middle East has shifted eastward from Palestine to Iran and the Gulf. Japan calls for urgent diplomatic efforts to de-escalate, as the lack of a clear path forward risks further destabilization. Regarding Iran, we urge all parties to remain committed to dialogue and achieve a complete and long-lasting cessation of hostilities. Japan supports the talks between the United States and Iran the mediation efforts by Pakistan and other regional countries, and will work closely with the international community to pursue diplomacy and prevent escalation. Japan also stresses the need to immediately restore stability in the Strait of Hormuz and ensure safe and free navigation as guaranteed by international law. Without the assurance of free navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, global food and energy security will be placed in grave jeopardy. We are deeply concerned that the crisis has spread to Lebanon, causing displacement, civilian casualties, infrastructure damage, and the deaths of UNIFIL peacekeepers. Attacks on blue helmets are unacceptable and should be strongly criticized. While welcoming the April 17th ceasefire agreement continues to hold, we strongly urge all parties to fully implement its provisions. Mr. President, even as global attention focuses on the Gulf and Lebanon, the importance of the Palestinian question remains undiminished. We are deeply concerned that since the conflict surrounding Iran began, the Israeli government has approved new settlement plans and settler violence has intensified in the West Bank. Such activities violate international law and undermine the realization of the two-state solution. Israel should refrain from actions that heighten tensions there. 6 months have passed since the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict was agreed. It is necessary to move to the second phase, and Hamas must disarm. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire. Israel should not obstruct supplies and should support humanitarian agencies to ensure basic services. In this context, we welcome the holding of local elections in the West Bank and Deir el-Balah in Gaza, especially as this was the first such vote in Gaza in 2 decades. In closing, Japan remains firmly committed to supporting efforts towards a stable and prosperous Middle East. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, India would like to express its sincere appreciation to Bahrain for convening today's open debate. I would also like to thank the briefers for their insightful remarks. There have been major developments, particularly in the Middle East, since the last quarterly open debate in January this year. These developments have serious implications across domains: international peace and security, economic and energy security, food security, international trade, and global supply chains. Today's debate, therefore, could not have been more timely and relevant. For India, Middle East is our proximate neighborhood, and we have significant stakes in the security and stability of the region. Our trade and energy supply chains are strongly linked to this geography, with implications for economy and energy security. Almost 10 million Indians live and work in the Gulf region. Their safety and well-being are a key priority for us. Since the outbreak of the conflict in the region on 28 February, India has been guided by its consistent and categorical calls to pursue dialogue and diplomacy and de-escalate tensions. Addressing the underlying issues is central to these goals. We have also expressed deep concern at the conflict and its aftermath, and urged all the relevant parties to exercise restraint, avoid escalation, and prioritize safety of civilians. In this context, India also underlines that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states must be respected. Commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz is of particular concern to India, given its importance to our energy and economic security. Commercial shipping must not be the target of military attacks, and such attempts are deplorable. India notes with concern that precious lives of Indian seafarers aboard ships have been lost during the course of the conflict. We underscore that the targeting of commercial shipping and endangering innocent civilian crew members or otherwise impeding the freedom of navigation and commerce in the Strait of Hormuz are unacceptable. International law in this regard must be fully respected. It bears mention in this context that India had co-sponsored UNSC Resolution 2817 that was adopted on 11th March. We strongly urge for an early restoration of safe and unimpeded freedom of navigation and global commerce through the Strait of Hormuz. Mr. President, ongoing developments in Gaza and West Bank also deserve our utmost attention. The humanitarian situation there calls for more active discussions and urgent action to alleviate it. The loss of civilian lives, including women and children, and destruction of civilian infrastructure continue to be a concern. Over the years, including in the recent past, India has been supporting Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank through the implementation of projects with a view towards making a tangible impact on their daily lives. Capacity building and livelihood development receive considerable attention under India's human-centric approach on this front. Even as we undertake such projects, the need for a lasting solution can hardly be overemphasized. At this juncture, India reiterates its support for a two-state solution and for all efforts towards a lasting and durable peace in the region. Mr. President, India would now like to draw the attention of member states towards developments in Lebanon, including regarding UNIFIL. Blue helmets serve in challenging circumstances in accordance with UN Security Council mandate towards the cause of maintenance of international peace and security, and they must not be targeted. We strongly condemn all attacks on UN peacekeepers deployed in UNIFIL. Such attacks must be thoroughly investigated in an expeditious manner and perpetrators brought to justice. It is vital to respect the sanctity and inviolability of UN premises. Safety and security of peacekeepers are non-negotiable. There must be accountability for crimes against these peacekeepers. It bears recall that India piloted UNSC Resolution 2589 regarding accountability for crimes against peacekeepers. We welcome the announcement of a ceasefire in Lebanon and hope that this will advance the negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, leading to lasting peace in the region and an end to the suffering of people on both sides. Turning to Syria, India supports a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process, and our commitment to the Syrian people is manifested in our humanitarian and development support to them in diverse ways. Mr. President, Middle East cannot remain a theater of conflict. The people of the region deserve peace, dignity, and hope after decades of turmoil. India stands ready to support all sincere efforts that are aimed at realizing just and lasting peace in the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of India for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, we express our thanks to the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this open debate, and we reiterate our support for its presidency of the Security Council this month. The tragic situation that the Middle East has been enduring for decades, and which today's gravity threatens the stability and peace of the entire world, is, as we already said, a direct consequence of the international community's failure to restore the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people over their entire land. Today, it's extremely dangerous and irresponsible to continue to let our world being driven by few personal and illegitimate agendas, and to continue to manage the current international situation as if it was business as usual. Tunisia, as always, will continue to combat with no hesitation colonialist agendas and murdering of civilians, wherever it's used as a policy. In this context, my country expresses its strongest condemnation of the continued violation by the occupying power of the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, and its persistence in annexation policies and efforts to expand settlement area and create a new fait accompli. Mr. President, guided by the steadfast principle of its foreign policy, Tunisia reaffirms its commitment to respecting the sovereignty of all states, the rule of law, and the primacy of peaceful means in settlement of disputes. We reiterate our full solidarity with the Arab countries in the face of any threat to their security, stability, and sovereignty. We call for an immediate halt of escalation and the adoption of negotiation and diplomacy in order to secure decent life for the future generation. It's crucial for Tunisia to remain, as it has ever been, on the right side of history. And I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Tunisia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement. I congratulate the Kingdom of Bahrain upon its accession to the presidency of the Security Council this month and express appreciation for granting NAM the opportunity to present its position on the question of Palestine. NAM reaffirms its long-standing common and principled position on the question of Palestine, and is deeply concerned about the implications of this historical injustice against the people of Palestine, and most critically in the Gaza Strip, where the civilian population continues to suffer from the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe inflicted on it by Israel, the occupying power. NAM supports all prospects for a just solution to this historical injustice and for peace and security in the region. The grave situation in the Gaza has led to the worsening humanitarian situation not only in Gaza but also throughout the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, with the rising Israel military raids, land confiscations, home demolitions, and rampant settlement expansion, forced displacement of entire Palestinian communities, widespread sexual violence and terrorism, and the constant violations against the historic and legal status quo at the holy sites of Jerusalem. The Non-Aligned Movement rejects in the strongest terms the approval of discriminatory legislation imposing the death penalty against Palestinians and call for its immediate reversal. NAM condemns in the strongest terms all these illegal practices and all forms of violence, particularly Israeli military attacks and Israel's collective punishment against the Palestinian people, as grave breaches of international law, including humanitarian and human rights law. The killing and injury of more than 24,600 Palestinian civilians in Gaza, the majority of whom are children and women, as well as medical personnel, humanitarian workers, and journalists, is an indictment to the mandate of the UN Security Council. NAM demands an immediate and complete cessation of all forms of armed hostilities, violent repression, and illegal Israeli policies and practices against the Palestinian people and other nations in the region. The Non-Aligned Movement reaffirms its appreciation of the role played by the Arab Republic of Egypt and the State of Qatar in the efforts to ensure a permanent ceasefire. We further reiterate our call for unimpeded humanitarian access, including by UNRWA and other United Nations agencies, and for the safe and effective distribution of sufficient humanitarian assistance throughout the Gaza Strip to all Palestinian civilians who need it, including for urgent medical needs, in full respect of the principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. Healing, recovery, and rebuilding for the Palestinian people in Gaza cannot be delayed any longer. They cannot continue to be deprived of food, water, medicines, and shelters that are desperately needed to alleviate the catastrophic humanitarian conditions they have suffered for too long. In this regard, the Non-Aligned Movement commends the efforts of the Arab Republic of Egypt to convene and host the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit on October 13th last year, which focused on unequivocal support to the implementation of the Sharm el-Sheikh Agreement to end the illegal Israel war on Gaza Strip, the ceasefire agreement concluded on October 9, 2025, and mediated by the Arab Republic of Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States of America, aimed at ending the illegal Israel war on Gaza Strip. The non-aligned movement welcomes the announcement of a cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, brokered by the United States of America for a period of 10 days, which was extended by 3 weeks, and views it as a significant step towards de-escalating tension and halting Israeli aggression against Lebanon. The movement further welcomes the 4 points initiative of the President of the Republic of Lebanon, with the launch of the negotiations aimed at halting hostilities and ending Israeli occupation. The movement emphasizes the imperative of Israel's full compliance with the ceasefire, the cessation of all military attacks against Lebanon, immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal from all Lebanese territories, and the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. The movement reaffirms its support for the Lebanese state in asserting its control and sovereignty over all Lebanese territory, confining the possession of arms to the state alone, and advancing its reform agenda. The movement underscores the urgent need to scale up humanitarian assistance to Lebanon to address the growing needs of affected civilians, as well as to enhance support for the Lebanese armed forces. The movement also strongly condemns the attacks on UNIFIL personnel and premises. It extends its deepest condolences to Indonesia and France for the loss of 3 Indonesian and 2 French peacekeepers serving with UNIFIL. NAM condemns Israeli incursions into Syrian territories in a flagrant violation of international law, UN Charter and the 1974 Disengagement Agreement, and calls on the Security Council to exert pressure on Israel to fully withdraw from all Syrian territories. NAM condemns the repeated Israeli attacks against Syrian Arab Republic as they constitute a clear aggression against a sovereign state and a flagrant violation of provision of international law and Charter of the United Nations. NAM member states once again reiterate their call for continued provision of needed humanitarian and socio-economic assistance to the Palestinian people, including Palestinian refugees. The movement reaffirms the continued indispensability of UNRWA along other United Nations agencies and international organizations in the provision of urgently needed humanitarian assistance in line with international standards, and argues the international community to support the agency in all ways, including sufficient and predictable funding. Mr. President, to conclude, the movement seizes this opportunity to reiterate its call for collective international efforts to uphold international law, to end the historical and grave injustice against the Palestinian people. NAM member states reaffirm their commitment to promoting a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, including the plight of Palestinian refugees, and reaffirm their support for the Palestinian people in their struggle to achieve justice and fulfill their inalienable rights and legitimate national aspiration, including self-determination, freedom, and independence in their sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uganda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, my delegation thanks you and the Bahrain presidency for convening this important open debate. Vietnam aligns itself with the statement just delivered by the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Vietnam remains deeply concerned about the ongoing situation in the Middle East, including developments in and around the Hormuz Strait, continued hostilities and restrictions on humanitarian access in Gaza, the worsening conditions in the West Bank, and the deterioration of security in southern Lebanon. These developments are causing immense human suffering, disrupting trade and energy supply, heightening uncertainties, and risking implementation of Security Council Resolution 2803 and the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. Mr. President, Vietnam strongly condemns acts of hostility targeting UN personnel and facilities, including the recent attacks against the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, which resulted in the tragic loss of 6 peacekeepers over the past 2 months. We extend our deepest condolences to the United Nations, as well as to the governments of Indonesia and France, and families of those who have lost their lives. Vietnam firmly opposes military attacks against sovereign states, particularly those that have declared their non-involvement. We are especially alarmed by attacks against civilian infrastructure. Under all circumstances, civilians and critical civilian infrastructure must be protected. Any such attacks constitute violations of international law and relevant United Nations resolutions, including Security Council Resolution 2573. Vietnam underscores that maritime safety and security, as well as freedom of navigation and overflight, must be upheld in accordance with international law, particularly the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It is essential not only for stability in the Middle East, especially in and around the Strait of Hormuz, but also for safeguarding global energy supplies, food security, and economic stability. Mr. President, there can be no military solution to the conflicts in the Middle East. Vietnam welcomes all mediation and facilitation efforts aimed at de-escalation, ending hostilities, consolidating ceasefires, and advancing a balanced, constructive, and mutually acceptable solution. Vietnam also calls on international community not to allow recent developments in the Middle East to overshadow the Palestinian question. We reaffirm our unwavering support for the legitimate right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and for the State of Palestine's full membership in the United Nations. We remain steadfast in supporting the two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolutions. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Mr. President, Canada is closely following the developments in the U.S.-Iran negotiations and welcomes the extension of the ceasefire announced by the United States. We stand ready to support efforts towards a diplomatic solution that would bring a durable end to the war. We also thank Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other parties for their ongoing efforts. Negotiations remain the most viable and sustainable means to address Iran's nuclear program and destabilizing activities in the Middle East. Canada is also working closely with its partners to help ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Jordan have all been attacked by Iran and have sustained reprehensible strikes on their territory, civilian infrastructure, and economic assets. We all must stand united and in full solidarity with our Gulf and Jordanian partners. Canada reiterates its strong condemnations against Iran for its unlawful strikes against civilians and civilian infrastructure, as well as its actions that threaten maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz. Canada has intensified diplomatic engagement with Gulf partners, allies, and international organizations to reinforce collective responses, including by co-sponsoring resolutions at the UN Security Council and the Human Rights Council condemning Iranian strikes. Canada fully supports the diplomatic efforts of Israel and Lebanon, facilitated by the United States, to seek a lasting political solution that ensures Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We commend the parties for their recent agreement to extend the ceasefire by 3 weeks, and we encourage them to use this opportunity to de-escalate hostilities and negotiate a durable political solution that guarantees Lebanese sovereignty. Canada stands with the Lebanese government in its efforts to consolidate all weapons under state authority and to disarm Hezbollah. We are deeply saddened by the loss of civilian lives, including that of a Canadian, and we have requested a thorough investigation into the circumstances of his death. Canada strongly condemns strikes on civilians, including journalists, humanitarian aid workers, and UN peacekeepers. Canada will continue to work with global partners to deliver urgent aid to the people of Lebanon, and we express deep appreciation to Jordan for leading the Humanitarian Bridge Initiative, for which Canada took part.
We remain alarmed by the deterioration of the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. The position of Canada remains clear. Only a two-state solution can bring peace, security, and lasting dignity to both Palestinians and Israelis. Let us not forget the horrible terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023 that cost the lives of some 1,200,000 people, including Canadians. Canada continues to support the peace plan for Gaza and wishes to see concrete progress. Political negotiations must lead to the disarmament of Hamas and its withdrawal from governance of Gaza. Canada fully supports the program of reform of the Palestinian Authority so that it can play a role in the governance of Gaza. We applaud the holding of Palestinian local elections in difficult conditions, and we're happy to support them by observation of the elections through our office observers in Ramallah. Canada denounces the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, where, in spite of the ceasefire, the scale of the suffering is intolerable. Canada continues to demand the immediate and sustained access of humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid is not a bargaining chip. It is not an option. It is an obligation. Since the 7th of October 2023, Canada has pledged to provide some $400 million in international aid. We will continue to support vital assistance, and we're ready to support the stabilization, recovery, and rebuilding of Gaza. Furthermore, the expansion of Israeli settlements and the violence of extremist settlers in the West Bank is continuing unabated. Canada condemns the acts of violence, intimidation, and destruction of property committed by extremist settlers against Palestinians, and urges the Israeli authorities to bring to justice those responsible for such actions. Furthermore, Canada reiterates its condemnation of the Israeli law that is discriminatory regarding the death penalty, that will foster the violence of extremist settlers while further dehumanizing Palestinians. Canada calls on all parties to recall our common humanity and the sacred character of life. We must seek to preserve a space for diplomacy and the peaceful solution capable of laying the groundwork for lasting peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Canada for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Spain.
Mr. President, since the last open debate on the Security Council on the Middle East, the overt war and unprecedented extension of the conflict in the region with global repercussions for all of us has shaken the foundations of the international order that we have been building for some 80 years here in the United Nations. Daily we see an increase in the number of victims, wounded, and destruction of basic necessities for life in Gaza, West Bank, and Lebanon. We have to say clearly that bombing of densely populated areas and critical civilian infrastructure, energy, hospitals, and schools are a violation of international law and humanitarian international law. That attacks against journalists and sanitary personnel are assaults against the freedom of expression, the right to information, and the right to health. Spain will continue condemning them and demanding that they should be investigated and that those responsible should be brought to justice. In the face of war and violence, our response is clear. No. No to military solutions to disputes. No to the use of force. No to acting outside of international law. Diplomacy and dialogue are the only path towards the resolution of conflicts. Peace must be built and cannot be imposed. There's a majority demanding the defense of negotiations, supporting the work of regional mediators so that the ceasefire between the United States and Iran is consolidated, between Lebanon and Israel, and that we put an end to the destruction and the loss of human lives and start working on in restoring stability. Respect for international law is the path to solving the blockade of the Hormuz. The full guarantee of freedom of navigation in accordance with the Convention of the Law of the Sea of 1996. I want to reiterate today before this Council the demand that Iran reopen the straits in conformity with international law. Dialogue is the only possible way to put an end to the recurring cycles of violence in Lebanon. The parties must commit themselves responsibly to comply with the ceasefire and make progress, which could be a historic opportunity towards peace and security. I want to acknowledge the courage of the Lebanese authorities today in moving towards peace and ensure them of the full support of Spain in their efforts to defend the integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon and the full exercise of monopoly over weapons by the state. Our solidarity is with the people of Lebanon. It's firm, and we will increase our humanitarian aid with a new package of financial aid of 9 million euros to remedy to ease the suffering of the Lebanese people and the refugee crises. Spain supports the full implementation of Resolution 1701 of this Council and the work of UNIFIL with its presence of an important contingent there, the second largest European one. I want to acknowledge here the commitment and courage and commitment to peace of all blue helmets in difficult circumstances and condemn the unacceptable attacks that they've suffered in violation of the basic principles of international law. I'd like to express our deepest condolences to Indonesia and France and demand an investigation of all attacks against peacekeepers. One of the perverse consequences of the current conflict is its destabilizing potential in the long run for the entire region. We cannot allow that in a crucial moment the extension of the conflict sweeps away progress achieved in Iraq and Syria. Spain will continue supporting the efforts of stabilization to build and consolidate their respective institutions, to defend a model of inclusive government committed to security with guarantees for their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Mr. President, we also condemn the strongest terms the unjustifiable attacks of Iran against its neighbors in violation of their sovereignty, of international law, and that have targeted civilian facilities. The increase in the fronts of war, multiplication of fronts of war, cannot conceal violations of international law and human rights that are perpetrated in Palestine. The deterioration of the situation, the humanitarian drama in Gaza that has had 2 million people living in horror 2 years after the 2 years of war. The consolidation of occupation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the unbridled violence of the settlers. What more has to happen for us to react? How many more discriminatory laws such as the one that imposes the capital punishment against Palestinians, must we see? We have to be clear and say that Israel must comply with international law, with its obligations under international humanitarian law as an occupying power, and the respect for human rights. We reiterate our appeal to the Israeli government to allow for the entrance of humanitarian aid, large-scale humanitarian aid, to open all crossing points and allow for the action of United Nations, including UNRWA. We reiterate the need to strengthen support, political and financial, to the Palestinian Authority that must participate in the transitional governance mechanisms. We hail its efforts at reform and its work to renovate its political legitimacy and the holding of local elections recently. To achieve a real, just and lasting peace so that Israel and Palestine coexist peacefully, we have to work to extend peace and security in the region. It's important to take concrete steps to achieve the implementation of the two-state solution on the basis of the relevant decisions of the Security Council, including Resolution 2803 and the New York Declaration. Any other option has already demonstrated over and over its failure. Mr. President, lastly, the citizens of the Middle East are seeing their lives disappearing before their eyes. In the face of such a human drama, such a loss of hope, it's urgent that the Security Council acts. We have a responsibility as members of the United Nations to mobilize all our efforts, use all the instruments that we have to achieve restoration of peace and stability in the Middle East, on which the peace and stability of the world depend. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Spain for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Bulgaria.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. President, Bulgaria has been following with great concern the development of the security situation in the Middle East. We believe that recent diplomatic advances offer a fragile window of opportunity, but there are unresolved issues that must be dealt with in order to achieve long-term stability. Bulgaria applauds the ceasefire concluded between the United States and Iran. We also commend the mediation efforts of Pakistan and other regional partners that have been essential to facilitate dialogue. The freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz must be guaranteed at all times, because this is a pillar of global energy security and international trade. Imposing tolls is not acceptable, nor is it legal. All the parties must adhere strictly to international law, including international humanitarian law and the Convention of the United Nations on the Law of the Sea. Bulgaria expresses its strong support for the ceasefire concluded between Israel and Lebanon and calls for its full and comprehensive implementation. We hail the leading role of the United States in concluding this agreement after intensive mediation. It is now essential to ensure that this ceasefire holds, to allow for continued negotiations with a view towards a security agreement and lasting peace. We also underscore the importance of the full implementation of Resolution 1701 of the Security Council, full respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon, as well as the reestablishment of the full authority of the state over weapons and the disarmament of all non-state armed groups, in particular Hezbollah. Bulgaria will contribute to the humanitarian aid and efforts to support the stability and resilience of Lebanon, given that the civilian population of Lebanon are the main victims of the recent escalation. Bulgaria calls on all actors to ensure the protection of civilians, of humanitarian personnel, and the blue helmets of the United Nations. Their presence is essential for maintaining peace and the delivery of vital assistance to unstable areas. And we express our condolences to Indonesia on this point. As far as Gaza is concerned, Bulgaria reiterates its appeal for the implementation fully and effectively by all parties of the ceasefire and all the provisions of Resolution 2803 of the Security Council. This includes concrete progress in disarming Hamas and all the other non-state armed groups, as well as measurable improvements in the humanitarian situation and the establishment of conditions that are conducive to stabilization and recovery. Bulgaria would like to express its strong support to the Office of the High Representative for Gaza, Mr. Mladenov, and his key role in facilitating and coordinating the implementation of Resolution 2803. We acknowledge his efforts to ensure coherence among international actors and support making operational the ceasefire arrangements and make progress on concrete measures on the ground, in particular in terms of humanitarian access. Strengthening of this mechanism is essential to translate to commitments into tangible results and maintain the momentum towards a lasting and peaceful solution. Bulgaria is deeply concerned by the disastrous humanitarian situation in Gaza. A sustained humanitarian access throughout the Gaza Strip must be ensured, and humanitarian organizations must be able to operate independently and impartially. As a member state of the European Union, Bulgaria is also concerned by the continuation of unilateral actions aimed at expanding Israeli settlements in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem. Bulgaria considers that a lasting peace requires a broader regional security framework. We support efforts aimed at establishing such an architecture, including through the Abraham Agreements, as a means of promoting dialogue, cooperation, and stability. Bulgaria reaffirms its firm commitment in favor of a global, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East, based on full respect for international law and the relevant frameworks of the United Nations. We reiterate our unshakable support for the two-state solution, with Israel and a Palestinian state, a viable Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security. The achievement of this goal requires sustained diplomatic engagement, regional cooperation, and coherent implementation of the relevant resolutions of the United Nations. We are determined to continue working with our international and regional partners to promote this credible political prospect and strengthen stability and promote peace and prosperity, lasting prosperity in the region. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Bulgaria for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Venezuela.
Mr. President, since this is the first time that we're taking the floor during this month, allow me first of all to congratulate you and wish you every success at the head of this important body, the mandate of which has acquired renewed importance in the midst of the current international situation. Furthermore, we'd like to express our gratitude to the keynote speakers for their valuable presentations, of which we have taken due note. We also subscribe to the statement made by the delegation of the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Mr. President, 3 months after the last open debate of the Security Council on the important topic that brings us together today, the situation on the ground and in the occupied Palestinian territories continues to be deeply worrisome. Far from improving, the situation is only getting worse, particularly in the Gaza Strip, with an entire people still under siege that continues to confront day after day extreme conditions of great vulnerability. In spite of the ceasefire announced 6 months ago in October of 2025, there are continued reports of violence, of civilian victims, and severe restrictions to humanitarian access. There are multiple reports that confirm that the Palestinian population continues to live in precarious conditions with extensive displacements, food insecurity, and limited access to essential basic services. Beyond the tragedy that everyone knows about in Gaza, in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, there are still demolitions of houses, the displacement of communities, expansion of settlements. All of this erodes prospects for a just, comprehensive, and lasting solution based on the two-state solution. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, while we are respectful of international law and the sovereignty of states, is duty-bound to express its profound dismay over the recent adoption of Israeli legislation that envisions imposing the death penalty against Palestinian citizens. This is a measure that has been broadly questioned, not only due to its discriminatory character, but also because it contravenes fundamental norms of international humanitarian law and human rights. We consider that the introduction of this type of instruments, that is pseudo-legal instruments, which seek to codify a de facto racial system, and that confirms in turn the existence of an apartheid, is a very dangerous escalation that clearly is incompatible with the obligations of an occupying power and with international standards in the area of due process, the right to life and human dignity. Furthermore, our delegation would like to take this opportunity to reiterate our strong support for the essential work of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Middle East. In this context, where humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people continue to grow, the role of UNRWA continues to be essential for millions of Palestinian refugees. We therefore call for an end to the growing pressure against this agency, including operational restrictions and questions about its mandate. Mr. President, in the face of this panorama, we reiterate in fully in line with the principles of our historic diplomacy that the solution to the Palestinian question cannot be the imposition of fait accompli on the ground, but rather strict respect for international law, including the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Venezuela reaffirms its unshakable support for the just cause, Palestinian cause, and the inalienable right of this heroic people to self-determination and their free, independent, and sovereign state of Palestine in the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital and as a fully fledged member of the United Nations. In this context, and in light of the escalation of events that we've seen over the past few months in the Middle East, we would also like to take this opportunity to make an appeal to step up and support diplomatic efforts underway and to privilege mechanisms of peaceful resolution of disputes in conformity with the UN Charter as an essential path to preserving peace, security, and stability in this brethren region and beyond. Mr. President, the international community has a responsibility to act coherently and with determination, guided at all times by the principles that unite us, that we have agreed together, and that sustain both the multilateral system as well as the system of collective security that is envisioned in the founding charter of this organization, and that in spite of any adversity maintains its full relevance today. We therefore conclude by reiterating the firm commitment of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to the defense of international law, justice, and peace, and the support of any initiative geared towards promoting a world of peace and development, sustained in values such as solidarity and international cooperation, where the legitimate aspirations of our peoples can become without further ado a reality. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Venezuela for the statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until Thursday, the April 30th at 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.